Hey everyone, how's it going? So today we are talking about the Texas courts. So I'm going to keep this format going where I just go through the PowerPoint basically that I've made. So let's just start walking through it. All right, so Texas courts, it is confusing. It is. But what we're going to do, I'm just going to highlight the main points, the stuff that I need you to know. We're going to focus more on concepts and just understanding how the court works. And in my view, that's most important. That's what I want you to be able to take away from it. So let's get started. So first, let me pose a question to you guys with basically zero context. Is justice blind? You know, should it be? So what I would say is let's define justice first, and then we'll think about how the judiciary should be constructed to reflect that. Another way to ask this, well, not another way, but a related question that we will get into is, should judges be apolitical? Should the justice system be free from politics? Specifically, the actual judges that do the judging. Should they be immune from politics, or should it be political? That is the question. So we'll think about that, but let's really get into it. So in order to define justice, well, there are multiple ways of defining justice, and this is not even an exhaustive list, but these are the most common, and I think it's a good starting point. So there are four main types of justice. The first is distributive. Everyone gets their fair share. Now, what is fair? We can always talk about that, but in theory, it's everybody should get their fair share. So an example is that slices of pizza should be equal. If you cut a piece of cake or pizza, it's like maybe somebody does legitimately want a smaller slice. But in theory, you don't go cutting cake or when you cut a cake, you expect everybody to get the same size piece, That would be an example of distributive justice at like a very base level. Procedural justice is everyone is treated equally under the law. So basically follow the process. What happens, but if you follow the process and if the process is fair and consistent, that will lead to just results. So that would be a second theory of justice. Retributive justice is you get what you deserve. So think the Joker, if you've seen that movie. Punishment fits the crime. You do the crime, you do the time. Like, think of it as an equality between the act and the outcome. So punishment, crime. That makes sense? Okay. Restorative justice is making things whole again. So, the reparations debate, that would be an example of restorative justice. But even more generally, something that we already, have and have had for a while is like paying damages in civil suits. So if you sue someone for, wrongful death or, discrimination or, wrongful firing or something, you can request damages, and a court may agree with you, in which case the offending party would have to pay you or provide some kind of restitution in order to make things whole again, right? So those are generally the four types of justice. This is me, going off script, I guess. Like, the book doesn't really talk about this, but I really wanted to emphasize it. It is abstract and philosophical, but these ideas are acted out through the way the courts are constructed, and it's more generally just implied in order to justify the existence of the courts or the justice system in general. So as it relates to the exam, I would say something like, what are the different types of justice? Or proponents of retributive justice would argue that. And what they would argue is like the punishment should fit the crime. You get what you deserve, something like that. So am I going to provide any answers for you about what justice is correct? No, that's not my gig. But I do want you guys to be able to think about that, because some of the debate as far as what the justice system is and what we should do about the courts and if the courts represent the people, whatever, all those questions, that does get back into these very fundamental concepts of justice. So just be thinking about that, just in general in your own life. And if you think about it, it will benefit you on the exam as well. So now let's get into a bit of the nitty gritty. Let's talk about the structure. This is confusing. So I've highlighted the level, like the courts in green that I want you to know. I'm not going to make you know every single one in what differentiates them. I just need you to know the main things, and I will indeed show you how to think about it. So the layers of courts in descending order. So we're starting with the highest courts. We have the Texas Supreme Court, which is the highest civil court in Texas, consists of 9 elected justices, keyword elected, serving 6-year terms who have final state authority over civil cases. So final authority means like the court of last resort. At the federal level, the Supreme Court is the court of last resort. It can go no higher than that. In Texas, it can go no higher than the Texas Supreme Court. Does that make sense? If it goes higher than that, then it becomes a federal question. Then it goes through the federal courts, right? But at the Texas level, the Texas Supreme Court is the highest court that deals with civil suits. Now, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals is also the highest court in Texas, but it deals with criminal cases. So criminal cases involve jail time. Civil cases do not involve jail time, but it might involve money, paying damages. So both the Criminal Court of Texas Appeals, the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals, and the Texas Supreme Court are both the highest courts in the land, but they just deal with different types of cases. That I need that to be crystal clear. But just remember those two: Texas Supreme Court, Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. Those are the biggest ones. Now, the Court of Appeals is directly under them, and this is there are 14 intermediate level courts that hear appeals from district and county courts to determine whether those decisions were correct, and if they get appealed again, then they would go up to either one of those courts, depending on if it's a civil or a criminal case. So those are the three. Those are important. And then you have district courts. Those are the major trial courts in Texas. And they have general jurisdiction over a broad range of civil and criminal cases. So they are both civil and criminal. They go up through the district courts, and then depending on if it's a similar criminal case, then it gets funneled into either the Texas Supreme Court or the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. Now, specialty courts are important because these are specialized to deal with certain things such as mental health, alcohol and drug abuse, prostitution, things like that. Drug courts are an example of specialty courts. So, in Texas, if you get, especially if you're a first-time offender and you get arrested for possession or something, you would probably have the option to go through a drug court where they would offer you some kind of rehabilitation kind of program, and if you complete that, then you don't get jail time and you even get your case dismissed. So drug courts are not new. I mean, they're new-ish, but they're very important, and it provides a good way for people to stay out of jail, honestly. So yeah, it's a little bit different than a normal court because it's made for a specific purpose. County courts only exist in some counties deal with jurisdiction over probate cases, which are like dead people's wills, and they're presided over the county judge. They are important, but they're not the most important, so that's why it's not in green. Now, at the lowest level, let's just go with those. At the lowest level, you have the Justice of the Peace Courts, which are local trial courts with limited jurisdiction over small claims and very small misdemeanors. Municipal courts are also trial courts, but they deal with violations of city ordinances and also very minor criminal misdemeanors. So they're not the same, but they're comparable for all intents and purposes. They both deal with like traffic violations. So if you've ever gotten a ticket, you needed to go to court to either protest it or just pay the fine, you probably went to a municipal court or maybe a justice of the peace court. So yeah, yes, there are more than those, but let's just focus on the ones in green. And again, it starts from the highest level and goes down to the lowest level. So quick analysis, yes, the court system is confusing. Again, I'm not going to test you on every single layer of the court. But what I do want you to understand is that there's a hierarchy and that each court deals with different levels of cases within the legal process, and that civil and criminal courts deal with different types of cases. So regarding the former, let's talk about that. Where the hierarchy in each court deals with different levels of the legal process. So this is very important. Original jurisdiction is the ability to hear a case in the first instance. So the very first time it goes to court, that's the original jurisdiction. Courts generally only have appellate or original jurisdiction. So the lowest level courts are going to have original jurisdiction because that's where the case has to originate. Any court that has appellate jurisdiction, they have to wait until the case works their way up to that level. So you can't go directly to the Court of Criminal Appeals. You have to work your way up because the Court of Criminal Appeals only has appellate jurisdiction. So I need that to make sense to you guys. If y'all remember Marbury versus Madison, actually I won't go into it, but the big twist at the end of the case was that the Supreme Court didn't have original jurisdiction to hear that case, and that's why Marbury wasn't able to get his appointment as the Justice of the Peace. I won't go into that, but essentially, appellate versus original jurisdiction matters so much. It is baked into the legal process. You have to understand that in order to understand how the courts work. Now, civil versus criminal law. Let's talk about that. Civil law deals with disputes, usually between individuals over relationships, obligations, or responsibility. Like a breach of contract would be something like that. Somebody didn't, I paid them money and they didn't do the job, or they're reneging on this, or, my landlord won't get my water fixed, even though it says in the lease that, they're required to within a certain amount of time. So stuff like that. So the plaintiff would file a complaint. The plaintiff is the person that sues, basically. And then the person that's getting sued is the defendant. So it's plaintiff versus defendant. So it's person versus person. And essentially the way they decide who wins is through what's called the preponderance of evidence. So this goes into the burden of proof. Preponderance of evidence, if you think of it like, if you've ever seen like the image of like justice, it's like a scale, what I'm talking about, and there's like things on each side and you just see which side weighs the most. That's the preponderance of evidence, whichever side makes the best argument, right? So if you're 51% sure that landlord was in the wrong, then that's the way it'll go, right? Now, the verdict can be appealed, in which case it would have to go up and up and up that chain. Now let's compare that with criminal law. Criminal law is the branch of law that regulates the conduct of individuals and defines what crimes are and what the punishments are. So the plaintiff, again, the plaintiff is the person that would do the suing in a civil suit, but in a criminal case, the government, in this case, Texas, is the plaintiff. So the plaintiff charges an individual, who would be the defendant, with a crime of some kind. Felonies are the most serious ones, and capital felonies are punishable by death, or can be. capital crimes, capital murder, things like that. That's where the death penalty is on the table. Misdemeanors are minor criminal offenses. They may have a jail sentence involved, but it's not very big. You're definitely not considered a felon. Now, before a trial can occur, there has to be a grand jury that decides whether or not there's sufficient evidence to justify a trial. So there's like a trial before the trial, basically. The grand jury will issue an indictment charging the suspect with the crime, and then the crime act or the case actually proceeds. So you have to have a grand jury first before you can even like charge them with the crime. The defendant, like the person, has a right to a trial by jury. 12 jurors for felonies, 6 for misdemeanors, and the verdict must be unanimous. So if there's one person that doesn't agree, that would be a mistrial, and then the prosecution, the state, could decide whether or not to retry the case, but you can't be found guilty if one juror decides not to convict you. At least in that case, they might try the case again, but if the juror voted not guilty because there was some error in the way the prosecution presented the case, then it'd be a lot harder for them to try you again because they would, because it would be clear that the prosecution didn't do its job, right? But the main thing here that we need to talk about now is that in criminal cases, the burden of proof is beyond a reasonable doubt. So if you've ever heard that term, beyond a reasonable doubt, they have to be guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. Beyond a reasonable doubt, I wouldn't say this is a hard and fast rule because how can you even quantify this? But like, if a civil suit, you need to be 51% sure that somebody's in the wrong. Beyond a reasonable doubt would be like 95% sure or 99% sure. Like, there's always that one little thing in your head that might be like, maybe that person didn't do it. And if you are so sure beyond that, where like the only real, exception you could think of is like that aliens did it or something, that would not be a reasonable doubt. But you have to be damn sure that the person did it. Because of basically what the view is that if the government is going to take away your liberty, life, liberty, and property, if they're going to throw you in jail or even take your life, it can't be an easy process. It needs to be a hard standard to meet in order to make that lawful or just, going back to justice. So, the idea is that it would be better to like let 10 guilty people go free rather than to wrongly convict one innocent person, right? So that's the theory behind why the beyond a reasonable doubt standard is so high. So essentially, like, if you're a juror and you're not 99% sure, you are completely within your right to vote not guilty. Even if you do think the person's guilty, you can still vote not guilty if you want. That's called jury nullification. But, setting that aside and just talking about like a standard case, if you're not like totally sure, you should probably, it would be okay to vote not guilty. That's what I would say. Now, most cases, even if they go to trial, they normally result in a plea bargain. A plea bargain is you plead guilty, mainly without going to trial, but you are offered a lighter sentence. Most cases result in a plea bargain because it's just, especially if you do fight it and you do take it to trial, the prosecution is going to do everything they can to get that conviction. So they would definitely go easier on you if you just plea out, basically. So now let's think about the different standards of proof again. So civil versus criminal, which is easier to beat? Definitely criminal cases. Criminal cases are a lot easier to beat because the jury has to be so sure. while civil cases, again, only require a preponderance of evidence. So an example here would be the OJ trial. So OJ was able to beat the criminal case. He was found not guilty, but he was found liable for Nicole Brown Simpson, his ex-wife, and Ron Goldman, her friend. He was found, responsible for their deaths in a civil suit. So OJ lost the civil suit, but didn't go to jail for that. He did end up going to jail, but for something different. But yeah, he was able to beat the criminal case, but not the civil case. So that's very, very important. Again, because taking your money is still a big deal, but taking your money is a lot different than taking your life. So if the state has the power to take your life or take your freedom and potentially put you in jail for, the rest of your life, the standard of proof should be a lot higher. So that's incredibly important, and that in some ways gets back to the idea of justice. It would be interesting for you guys to think which type of justice that might line up with. Maybe retributive. Maybe you don't deserve to. No, I don't know. It's good to think about. Maybe procedural. If you follow the rules, it will result in justice. And the rules are that in criminal cases, it's a lot harder to get the conviction. Maybe because we would rather have 10 people go free, 10 guilty people go free than one innocent person be convicted. Maybe. But yeah, that's fun to think about. I urge y'all to do that. Now let's get into the politicization of the Texas courts. So at the federal level, all federal justices and judges are appointed, right? They are unelected. In Texas, judges are elected. So judges serve terms the same way any other politician does, and they are up for they have to go up for re-election, and sometimes they're challenged. Sometimes they're they have to you have to have campaigns. They have to raise money. They're politicians as well as judges. So that's the big thing. Now the reason why, in theory, or the reason why judges are appointed at the federal level is because the idea is that judges should be free from political debate. If a judge is constantly worried about re-election, they may not be able to make hard decisions, or if there's a hard decision, instead of weighing, the standard of proof, beyond a reasonable doubt, preponderance of evidence, what is just, what precedent is, they might be more inclined to to rule simply in a way that would please their constituents. Essentially the same as what you would get in Congress or the governor. So I want y'all to think about that. Is it better or worse that judges are unelected? They are not elected by the people at the federal level. So we technically don't have a say in who the federal judges are. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? I want y'all to think about that. And then flip it on its head. In Texas, we do elect our judges. Our judges do have to be aware of what the people want. They don't necessarily have to follow it, but if they don't, they might get kicked out of office. So I really, really, really want you to think about that. And of course, judicial elections have become highly partisan, as you would expect. Now, the only exception is that if there's like a death or a vacancy or a resignation, the governor can fill fill that seat, can appoint that seat, and because and it's confirmed by the Senate, right? So it's they're appointed by the governor, confirmed by the Senate. But because the Senate only meets every 2 years, sometimes that judge, by the time they're actually up to be considered, they've already been a judge for a year and a half, which essentially would make them basically an incumbent. So that is one way that the governor can put in judges who were not elected, but ultimately that judge would still be up for election at some point. Does that make sense? Okay. So basically, guys, that is, in my view, the most important stuff that we need to talk about. The fact that judges are elected in Texas, is that better or worse for the justice system? Should judges be accountable to the people, or should they be immune to political pressures? There's no right answer. I have my own opinion about it, but that's irrelevant. It's definitely a fantastic thing to talk about, and you could write books on it. You could spend your whole career studying it if you wanted to. I'm not saying you do. We're not saying you should, but I just urge you to really think about it. I will probably also put some question relating to this on a test, maybe a discussion post. Haven't quite decided, but it's definitely important enough that I need y'all to think about it. All right, guys, so that's what I got. I hope that made sense, and if you have any questions, just let me know. Cool. Thank you, guys.